Assalamu alaikum ji. We are into history and systems of psychology, and we are ready to go into Germany. We had been in England and in France, and we had taken a look at some of the British contributions, and then we took a look at some of the French contributions, and then I said we'll take a look at some of the German contributions. All of this is prior to the Industrial Revolution. Before we go into looking at the German contributions, that is the main topic of today, let us review what we had done in the last lecture. That is lecture number 8. If you recall, we talked about the associationists in Britain and then the French contributors. We talked about the British associationists consisting of Hume, Hobbes and Locke. Hobbes and Locke we covered previously, and last time we talked about Hume. So we will just review the main contribution of David Hume. आपको कुछ याद है? रिवाइज कीजिए थोड़ा सा. He said, what did he say? That animals and men are like machines, and the same laws that govern machines are the laws that are operative and govern animals and human beings. That we can discover the operative laws of animals and human beings. He also said that ideas become associated with each other. Why? Because of wishes, needs, desires, and habits. And that is why he is also called an associationist. And he is following the Aristotelian tradition. Remember, Aristotle had said that ideas become associated with each other as a result of similarity, contiguity, and contrast. And we have Hume saying that ideas become associated because of habit, wishes, and desires. Then we crossed the channel, the English Channel, and came into France. आप तो जानते हैं कि आजकल चैनल जो है इंग्लैंड और फ्रांस के दरमियान जो समुंदर का हिस्सा है, वो उसको हमने, इंसान ने समुंदर के नीचे से उसका रास्ता बना दिया. So Britain and France are connected by train under the sea, and that is called the Channel. So there is free flow of traffic underneath the sea. चलिए अब चैनल क्रॉस करते हैं और फ्रांस में चलते हैं. And we saw the contributions of two great philosopher psychologists in that era. One was Diderot. And what did he say? That knowledge comes about by observation, following the Aristotelian tradition. Then what is the purpose of knowledge? The purpose of knowledge to him was to facilitate man, to bring satisfaction, welfare into his life, to make him powerful. Now that is an important concept in Diderot. Knowledge as a source of power. अब यहाँ पर पिछली दफे हमने आपसे ये भी गुजारिश की थी that knowledge leads to power, but then power could be used negatively or positively. A group or a person becomes powerful, or a country becomes powerful, and then is domineering. We remember the history of the First World War, and we remember the history of the Second World War. A certain country had become powerful, and had exercised its power, resulting in such great mass destruction. And then man's power has now led to the environmental change. The pollution in the environment that has come about is a result of man's conquest of nature, man's power over environment and over nature. And that is the negative aspect of it. So, power has to be kept within its moral parameters. This is a much later contribution, but I'm just sensitizing you to this. Diderot had said that the purpose of knowledge is to gain power. The other contributor that we talked about in the last lecture was Comte. And what did he have to say? That scientists should not be concerned or over-concerned about moral judgments. They should be concerned more about collecting information and making a pool of information and then drawing conclusions from that pool of information. Okay, this is the French contribution. Let us now go over to Germany and take a look at what the German philosophers or psychologists contributed. The first one that we need to talk about in this context is Wilhelm Leibniz. Leibniz was born in 1646 and he died in 1716. Leibniz was very impressed with the theory of atoms, that the world is made of atoms and various objects that one sees are different combinations of those atoms. He was impressed with that theory. So he applied the same idea to explain and understand human beings and their behavior. And what does Leibniz say in that part? He coined the term monad, M-O-N-A-D. जैसे आप स्क्रीन पे देख रहे होंगे. He coined the term monad. And monads are what? Monads are like atoms. All matter that we see, everything that is there in the universe is made of monads, according to Leibnizian point of view. And these monads are like atoms. They are spiritual in nature, such that they cannot be destroyed. Remember, matter cannot be destroyed. And that is how Leibniz explains it, that matter is made of monads and they have a spiritual nature like the atoms and they cannot be destroyed. And monads grow and develop. The lowest of the animals are made of lowest monads, and the highest of the animals, that is man, the highest of the organisms, that is man, is also made of monads. So monads develop something that we inherit, something like an atom, except that it is spiritual in nature, that it is not material in nature, and that we share it with other animals. The animals have a lower level and human beings have a higher level. We are born with monads. Everything that we have is a function of those monads. Abhi ye dekhein, let us reflect on this point of view and see where it connects in the ancient thought. Does it connect with the Aristotelian, the Lockean point of view? Or does it connect with the Socratic and Platonian point of view? What do you think? Yes, you are absolutely right. It connects with the Socratic a Platonian point of view, because what Leibniz is saying is that we inherit these monads. That whatever we do, these monads are the propellant forces in us. It is diametrically opposed to Locke's view. And what was Locke's view? Do you remember? We are talking about the British associationists, and we had talked in that regard about a great contributor, John Locke. And what did John Locke say? Do you remember? I would give you one hint. Tabula rasa. That's right. John Locke had said that at the time of a child's birth, his mind is like a tabula rasa, or a clean slate. Now compare that point of view with Leibnizian point of view. Locke is saying that human beings are born with a clean slate. And what is Leibniz saying? That human beings are born with monads, already existing atoms which are spiritual in nature. So we have these two opposing points of view. These opposing points of view, as I have pointed out to you earlier, will continue to reflect in psychology, the entire history of psychology. What we call the material point of view and what we call the ideal point of view. The other thing that Leibniz said was that soul and body exist separately. Soul and body exist parallel to each other. Does that ring a bell in your mind? Does it remind you of somebody else who said a similar thing? Who said who said soul and body are two different entities that exist together in a person? Can you recall who said that? We covered his theories in some previous lectures. Well, let me refresh your memory on that one. That was René Descartes, the great dualist. He had proposed the view that body and soul exist parallel to each other, that they are connected by a gland which he thought was the pineal gland. And let us go back a little further in time. Do you recall Avicenna? And what had Avicenna said? Avicenna had said, recollect, we are talking about 980. Avicenna had said that soul and body exist separated from each other, but soul has an effect upon the body, and the body in turn has an effect upon the soul. So this duality of mind, soul or body is not a new one. Prior to Leibniz and prior to Locke, prior to Descartes, who had said that? Avicenna had already said that. So when we take a look at the development, we can see that Avicenna, Descartes, and then Leibniz are saying the same things, that mind or the soul and the body are two important parallel existences. This view in modern psychology is called psychophysical parallelism. ये मुतवाज़ी व्यू जो है रूह का और जिस्म का, इसको हम साइकोफिजिकल पैरेललिज्म कहते हैं, और ये लाइब्निज की एक इम्पॉर्टेंट कंट्रीब्यूशन है. अब थोड़ा सा और आगे चलें. Leibniz से आगे बढ़ते हैं, and let us take a look at another German philosopher, and that's Kant, Immanuel Kant, born 1724, died 1804. And what is his point of view? His point of view is that observation and empiricism can lead to knowledge. बड़ी अहम बात है, लेकिन ज़रा गौर से सुनिए. Observation and empiricism can lead to knowledge. ये एरिस्टोटलियन पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू है. एरिस्टोटल ने भी ऐसा ही कहा था, लेकिन कांट जो है वो इससे थोड़ा सा 2 कदम आगे चला है. और वो क्या है? दैट वंस फैक्ट्स, नॉलेज, इंफॉर्मेशन gets collected, human mind has an innate capacity. Human mind can rearrange and recatalog the information that is collected by observation and empiricism. Now, what are we talking about? We are talking about not a pure Aristotelian point of view, but a mixture of Aristotelian point of view with a Leibnizian point of view, because Leibniz had also said that we have monads, and the monads have this capacity to propel us. And Kant is airing similar views, that information is collected, of course by observation, but then mind has that capacity to add to that information, to rearrange that information, to make new patterns of that information, to make a new gestalt of that information. Does that term ring a bell in your mind? The term gestalt, if you recall, in the first lecture, I told you that we'd be talking about the Gestalt school also. Gestalt is a German word meaning a configuration or a pattern or a whole. And the Gestalt school, one of the important contributions of Gestalt school, which we will discuss in detail later, was that mind has an innate capacity to add to whatever is put into the mind. मिसाल के तौर पर जब आप फिल्म देखते हैं तो फिजिकली क्या देख रहे हैं आप देख रहे हैं एक एक्सपोजर और फिर दूसरा एक्सपोजर और फिर तीसरा एक्सपोजर, और इन पहले और दूसरे और तीसरे एक्सपोजर के दरमियान एक गैप है. लेकिन जब आप उसको रन करके फिल्म के तौर पर देखते हैं तो आपका माइंड वो गैप नहीं देखता और उसको मूवमेंट के तौर पर देख रहा है. आपने क्या किया? आपने गैप फिल इन कर लिया. दैट इज द गेस्टाल्ट पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू. वी विल टॉक अबाउट दैट इन सम डिटेल, बट लेट्स गेट बैक टू आवर फ्रेंड Immanuel Kant here. He is saying the same thing, that mind has a capacity to rearrange, fill in the gaps, recatalog information. And that is a deviation from the Aristotelian tradition. So his ideas are really a combination of Aristotelian or more recently Leibnizian point of view mixed with the Lockean point of view. Do you remember what is the Lockean point of view about how information and knowledge comes about? Yes, that mind is like a tabula rasa. It's a clean slate. That observation and reflection are the two elements that write on that tabula rasa. So Kant is talking of both of these. His position regarding man's and mind's working is somewhere in between these two. He makes a mixture of the Lockean and the Leibnizian tradition. He makes a mixture of what we observe and then what we add to it. And that is Kant's contribution. एक और अहम बात वो ये है कि कांट ने कहा था that mind does not exist in material form. Well, true enough. Mind does not exist in material form, and he concludes from there that since it does not exist in material form, and since science only deals with matter, therefore we cannot have a science called psychology, because psychology deals with functions of the brain, that is mind. So from his point of view, psychology cannot be a science. What do you think? Is he right? Psychology cannot be a science because it deals in functions of the brain, that is mind, and mind doesn't exist in material form. And since science only deals with matter and material things, therefore psychology cannot be a science. We have a dilemma here, we have a problem here. What do you think? Can psychology be a science? Most certainly, psychology can be a science. Mind doesn't exist in matter, but mind's expression exists in matter. So we can measure those expressions in material terms, in hard, solid terms. So psychology can certainly proclaim itself to be a science. Don't be taken in by this claim that psychology cannot be a science because it deals with non-material things. It deals with mind, but mind's expression is easily measurable. And it is measurable in material terms. We can't, for instance, look at learning, but we can look at performance that is influenced by learning. So from measuring performance or the change or an improvement in performance, we'll know that somebody has learned. We can't look into the mind and see whether learning has taken place or not. We might develop, let us say 200 years from now, certain instrumentation that would make us look into directly the mind, but for the time being, we can measure learning by its performance. We know that an organism has learned when the organism's performance changes, improves, and that is a very real expression. So don't be taken in by this claim that it's a soft science. Psychology is not a soft science as some people, including Kant, seem to believe. It deals in hard matter also. Let us go forward of Kant and take a look at another important contributor from Germany into the development of psychology. And that is Hegel, Friedrich Hegel. Friedrich Hegel was born in 1770 and he died in 1831. We are moving away from the French Revolution and nearing the Industrial Revolution. मैं आपको इन दो रेवोल्यूशंस के बारे में सेंसिटाइज करना चाह रहा हूं, इसलिए नाम लिया है आपके सामने. We saw that French Revolution 1789 resulted in the overthrow of monarchy and the end of feudalism in France. We will also look at Industrial Revolution, which is the opening, the second, third quarter of, second, third decade of the 19th century. And we will see the impact of that Industrial Revolution also on man man's thinking, and therefore on man's psychology. But for the time being, let us stick with after the French Revolution and before the Industrial Revolution. And we are talking about Germany prior to Industrial Revolution in Europe, and we are talking about a great philosopher, Hegel. Hegel had said that there is no conflict between mind and matter, or between wisdom and nature, and that there is a logical flow in nature, a logical flow. Nature is not haphazard. Nature has its own operative laws. Those laws are based upon logic. Those laws are logically connected. We need to discover those laws. We see things in a most haphazard manner. That is because we haven't had the opportunity. We haven't had the good sense. We haven't had the wisdom to discover the logical consistency, the logical linkage, the logical connection between what we observe. That is one of the most important contributions that Hegel had made, that there is a logical flow in nature. Another idea that he floats is that of the absolute truth or the absolute idea, absolute capital A. ये तकरीबन ऐसा ही है as if he is propounding the idea of a higher exalted being. ऐसा ही है जैसे हम कहें ज़ात बारी ताला है. That there is the absolute idea and all other ideas flow from that. The absolute idea is, of course, an idea. It's therefore non-material. It does not have a material function. It does not have a material form. He also put forward the view that objects and events cannot be separated. Remember, he talked about logical flow, and this is a further elaboration of how ideas and objects and events cannot be separated. Why can't they be separated? If you wanted to understand the psychology of a person, would you separate him from his environment, from his family life, from his social context, from the political forces on him that are acting upon him, from the economic demands on him? Would you be able to divorce him and separate him from all of these and then study him? Not possible, because a man and his psychology is a function of all of these factors. You can't separate a person from all of these forces that act upon him, and that is what Hegel is saying, that objects and ideas are related. They affect each other. You cannot separate them. And that is one aspect of the logical flow that he's talking about, that there is a linkage, a connection between the psychology of a person, his social being, his historical inheritance, the political influences on him, the economic forces that are pulling him or pushing him in various directions. All of these forces act upon him simultaneously. And if you separate the person from these, you won't be able to study him. His study would be wrong. It would be in void. ऐसे जैसे हवा में मोहल्लक आप एक चीज को पढ़ रहे हैं, वो इनकम्प्लीट रहेगी. ये भी हेगल की एक इंपॉर्टेंट कंट्रीब्यूशन है. और ये कनेक्टेड है एब्सोल्यूट आइडिया के साथ, ये कनेक्टेड है लॉजिकल फ्लो के साथ. अगली बात जो हेगल कह रहा है वो और भी मैं समझता हूं इससे भी ज्यादा अहम है, और वो है जिसको हम कहते हैं दैट ऑब्जेक्ट्स एंड इवेंट्स affect each other. It is not that objects do not affect events or that events do not affect each other, that these two affect each other. Human thoughts affect objects and objects affect human thoughts. Would you agree with this? Well, that is the ultimate or the logical flow that Hegel is talking about. That human beings are affected by their environments, by what is happening around them, and in turn, human beings affect. When Hegel says that objects and event affect each other, and in turn get affected, we can also understand it in the same vein that human beings influence environment and environment influence human beings. That there is a dialectical, a mutual relationship of cause and effect, and that is an important contribution. He also talks about the conflict or contradiction. Conflict or contradiction to him is the source of growth and development. I'll ask you a question. Would two teams play better against each other when they were on friendly terms, or would they play better against each other if they were in rivalry with each other? What is your idea on that? Obviously, their play would improve if they are in rivalry with each other. And that is what Hegel is saying, that contradiction or conflict is a source of growth and development. If you look at modern organizations today, a good CEO or a good chief executive of an organization is one who has, among other things, this capacity or this trick or this wisdom or this tactic to develop rivalry in his teams. Because rivalry brings out the best in people. And if you want an organization to grow and develop, there must be rivalry. एक बात जो आपके जहन में इससे मुतल्लिक आएगी वो ये है that rivalry could also be destructive, that it could degenerate into inter-group conflict. That's true. Rivalry could degenerate into an inter-group conflict and therefore be more harmful for an organization or for a growth. But rivalry, if it is kept within the parameters of rules and regulations of the organization, then rivalry is good. Then rivalry brings out the best in people, and when they do their best, when they want to excel from the competing group, then of course they perform at their top level, and thereby the organization grows, and thereby the organization reaches a higher level of excellence. And that is exactly what Hegel is talking about. That contradiction is a source of growth and development. Don't be afraid of contradiction. Don't be afraid of conflict. Of course, conflict must be kept within that parameter when it is not allowed to become destructive for a person or for teams or for organizations or for man and nature. But without conflict or contradiction, Hegel says growth would not come about. And that is one of the important contributions that Hegel made in the realm of philosophy and psychology. थोड़ा सा और आगे चलें, और हेगल ने क्या कहा है? One, his idea of how development takes place. Development in man takes place, he thinks, because the idea is born. An idea is born. He calls that idea thesis. Thesis. A thesis is an idea, a discovery. And then that idea or that thesis gives birth to the contradictory idea that he calls antithesis. Antithesis is a contradictory idea to thesis. And then the third stage of development is when thesis and antithesis, after having conflicted and contradicted each other, become merged into a whole idea that he calls synthesis. synthesis. Hegelian point of view then is that growth and development comes about as a function of contradiction, and there is a logical flow in that contradiction, and the contradiction takes the form of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. When synthesis emerges, when these two opposing ideas, thesis and antithesis, combine to make synthesis, then, of course, growth takes place, but then there is another idea that appears which is opposed to synthesis. And this process he calls negation of negation. He is explaining the contradiction and the mechanisms of contradiction leading to growth and development. He is showing us that there is a logical linkage, logical flow in these. And that is the main contribution of Hegel. What have we looked at? We have looked at Hegel's contribution. And Hegel's contribution in terms of ideas becoming old, generating their opposite, the old and the new colliding and giving rise to a new idea called the synthesis, and then synthesis becoming a thesis again and then being negated. We are talking about this logical flow and contradiction, and this process is called dialectic materialism or dialectical process. What is it called? A dialectical process. Dialectical process means logical growth of the process. Let us go forward and see what have we done so far. We have looked at the German contribution in today's lecture. The German contribution consisted of three great philosopher-psychologists, all of them prior to the Industrial Revolution. We are not talking about, remember, the French Revolution. We are talking about the Industrial Revolution. मैं आपको ये दो टर्म्स बार बार इसलिए बताता हूँ क्योंकि ये यूरोपियन हिस्ट्री में इनका बहुत ही अहम मकाम है. न सिर्फ यूरोपियन हिस्ट्री में बल्कि दुनिया की तारीख में. इसका हम जिक्र आगे चल के करेंगे. अभी जैसे हमने फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन का जिक्र किया तो फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन का बहुत ही अहम मकाम है दुनिया की तारीख में. वो इस तरह दैट फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन was the beginning of end of feudalism. जागीरदारी निज़ाम का खात्मा फ्रांसीसी इनकलाब से शुरू हुआ था। इसलिए फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन का सिर्फ फ्रांस की तारीख पे असर नहीं पड़ा, बल्कि फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन का सारी दुनिया की तारीख पे बहुत गहरा असर है। इसी तरह से इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन का आगाज इंग्लिस्तान में, लेकिन उसका सिर्फ इंग्लिस्तान की तारीख पे नहीं पड़ा, उसका सारी दुनिया की तारीख पर अहम असर पड़ा। अभी हम जो बात कर रहे हैं वो इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन या सनअती इनकलाब जो इंग्लैंड में हुआ उससे पहले की बातें कर रहे हैं। और आप देखेंगे कि जब सनअती इनकलाब की शुरुआत होती है तो इंसानी तारीख पे, इंसानी सोच पे और ख़ास तौर पे नफ्सियात पे उसका कितना गहरा असर पड़ता है, और नफ्सियात का सारा नज़र जो है वो किस तरह से बदल जाता है। फिलहाल अभी जो हमने देखा है वो 3 अहम जर्मन फिलोसफर साइकोलॉजिस्ट का जिक्र किया है हमने। ये भी गुजारिश कर दूं कि जर्मनी में सिर्फ यही 3 अजीम फिलोसफर साइकोलॉजिस्ट नहीं हुए, बल्कि बहुत बड़े बड़े लोग हैं। लेकिन क्योंकि आप अभी अंडर ग्रेजुएट कोर्स में हैं, इसलिए हम जर्मनी से मुतल्लिक सिर्फ इन 3 अहम फिलोसफर साइकोलॉजिस्ट का ही जिक्र करेंगे आपसे, और उन्हीं का जिक्र हमने आपसे किया है। एक दफ़ा उनको रिव्यू कर लेते हैं। ये कौन थे? सबसे पहले विल्हेल्म लाइपनिट्ज। ज़रा याद कीजिए लाइपनिट्ज ने क्या कहा था। एक टर्म मैं बोलता हूं और आपको जहन में आना चाहिए कि लाइपनिट्ज ने क्या कहा था। मोनाड्स, MONADS। याद आया? जी हां, मोनाड्स। और मोनाड इज एन इनहेरिटेड tendency, a kind of a spiritual atom that all of us have, and that predispose us towards certain things. And if you connect this concept of monad, you would see that it gets connected with who? The Socratic tradition. Socrates had said, and Plato had said, that we have tremendous power in the mind, and that if we look introspect, we can discover whatever there is to discover. So Leibniz is a follower, could be considered a follower of the Socratic tradition. That's one important philosopher, psychologist that we talked about today in Germany. The second philosopher psychologist that we talked about today was Kant. And what did Kant say? He had this idea of mixing the two traditions. He thought that knowledge and information can be gathered by observation, by the use of our 5 senses. And this is what? This is the Aristotelian tradition. Aristotle had preached that knowledge comes from observation, that knowledge comes from empiricism, that knowledge comes from using our 5 senses and collecting information through those 5 senses. So Kant is following that tradition so far. But then Kant goes forward of that. And he says, human beings also have a tendency to rearrange, regroup, recatalog the information that is collected. And this capacity is what? This capacity is an inborn capacity. Inborn capacity to rearrange, recollect, redesign information. So we are talking about Kant standing somewhere in between the Lockean and the Leibnizian tradition. We see Kant standing in between the Aristotelian and the Socratic point of view, the Platonian point of view. Information can be collected by observation. Well, once it's there, human beings have a capacity to add to it, to rearrange it, to recatalog it. اور یہی بیسس میں نے آپ کی یاد دہانی کے لیے آپ کو بتایا تھا، یہی ہے بیسس گسٹالٹ اسکول کا. اس کا بھی ہم آگے چل کے جائزہ لیں گے. اور تیسرا اہم جو ماہر فلسفہ یا ماہر نفسیات ہم نے دیکھا آج کے ریفرنس میں، وہ تھا ہیگل. اور ہیگل نے کیا کہا؟ ہیگل پٹ فارورڈ دا ویو that there is a logical flow in man's thinking, and that knowledge comes about as a function of growth, comes about as a function of development, comes about as a function of contradiction and conflict. And he gave us the idea of that contradiction or conflict in three or four stages, which is number 1, thesis, number 2, antithesis, and number 3, synthesis. There is thesis, an idea, and there is the antithesis, the opposite of that idea, and there is the synthesis, the amalgamation of that idea, or putting the antithesis and the thesis together, and that forms into a synthesis. The ideas of these three philosophers and psychologists left a very deep impression on the development of psychology as we know it today. We will talk about how these three philosophers, amongst others, impacted the later development of psychology. میں نے ابھی تھوڑا سا ریفرنس آپ کو دیا تھا کہ لائبنٹز نے موناڈز کا کانسیپٹ دیا، اور آپ کو اس کی ریفلیکشن فرائڈ میں دکھائی دے گی، آپ کو اس کی ریفلیکشن یونگ میں دکھائی دے گی. یہ جو فرائڈ اور یونگ کے کانسیپٹس ہیں انکانشیس کے، جن کے بارے میں ہم بہت ڈیٹیل سے پڑھیں گے، وہ تقریباً وہی بات کہہ رہے ہیں جو لائبنٹز نے کہی ہے. تو ریکیپ میں یہ بات یاد رکھیے کہ پہلا جو ماہر نفسیات ہے لائبنٹز، اس کا بہت گہرا اثر ہے، جیسے میں نے پوائنٹ آؤٹ کیا، یونگ اور فرائڈ پہ تو وہ کلیئرلی دکھائی دے رہا ہے. دوسرا ہم نے جو آج فلاسفر سائیکالوجسٹ دیکھا وہ تھا کانٹ. اور کانٹ نے یہ کہا تھا کہ نالج یا انفارمیشن آبزرویشن سے آتی ہے، لیکن مائنڈ میں کیپیسٹی ہے ٹو ری کیپچر اٹ، ٹو ری ارینج اٹ، ٹو ری کیٹلاگ اٹ، اینڈ that is what the Gestalt school was based upon. تو کانٹ کا یہ گہرا اثر ہے کہ ایک پورا کا پورا اسکول جو ہے وہ کانٹ کی ٹریڈیشن میں پیدا ہوا نفسیات میں. اور تیسرا کنٹریبیوٹر جو ہے وہ ہے ہیگل، جس نے ہمیں کہا کہ دیر از اے لاجیکل کنٹینیوٹی اینڈ دیٹ contradiction leads to growth and development. اور ابھی میں نے آپ کو مثال دی کہ ماڈرن ریسرچز، خاص طور پہ اسمال گروپ ریسرچز سے یہ ظاہر ہو رہا ہے کہ اگر ان میں کانٹرڈکشن اور رائولری ہے، اور کانٹرڈکشن اور رائولری کو پیرامیٹرز کے اندر رکھا ہوا ہے، تو دین دی گروپ ڈائنامک ٹیکس the group or the whole organization towards higher level of existence, towards excellence. تو ان تینوں جرمن فلاسفرز کی بہت اہم کنٹریبیوشنز ہیں اور ان کا بہت ہی گہرا اثر ہے موجودہ ماڈرن نفسیات پہ. آج کے لیے اتنا ہی کافی. آئندہ پھر اگلے لیکچر میں کچھ اور لوگوں کے بارے میں آگاہی حاصل کریں گے. پڑھتے رہیے، نوٹس دیکھتے رہیے اور زیادہ سے زیادہ علم حاصل کیجیے. Until the next time, خدا حافظ. God be with you.